Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Modern Mind interview series where we love to talk to regular humans just like you who are working to practice mental fitness every day in the best ways they know how, but also just a really hard thing to do. So it's special to hear from real live humans. And today we have a real live human here, Randy Ginsburg, who is an incredible entrepreneur, author, and marketer who's going to talk to us a little bit about his mental fitness journey. But before he does that, Randy, would you mind telling us a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, so like you said, I'm Randy and I live in New York City. I am the founder of Third Wall Creative, which is a content marketing agency helping B2B startups with their content. I also am a son and I try to be a great boyfriend and a great friend as well. So I'll try to focus on those three pillars from an identity perspective. But for the professional side of things, yeah, I run a content agency.
I love it. And let's actually talk a little bit about your pillars. Where did these come from?
Yeah, I think I am an only child, so having kind of a tight-knit relationship with my parents is really important. And, they were able to provide me a great life growing up. So now that I'm a bit older, being able to kind of give that back to them from the son perspective, that's a big one. I think boyfriend's just self-explanatory, try to be a good boyfriend when I can. And then, friendship's really important to me, I think, with business too. And we'll kind of talk about this more in the mental fitness journey. But I think people, I've heard them say, you can't have a really successful business, your health, and a great social life. And I try to actively disprove that every day. And the social life is one of the big things that I was very quick to not give up. So of course there's sacrifices that need to be made in any type of, ambitious working career, but really making sure to kind of hone those relationships that I have had and kept across, childhood friends, college friends, and then people that I meet just in the daily life of New York City is really important to me.
Hell yeah, Randy. Like, I love that about the you can't have it all, but like you're proving that you can. Why do you think that people think you can't have all three of those things, the work, social life, and
And health.
like,
I think, I
yeah.
mean, this might be a hot take, but I think most people aren't as rigorous or good at time management as others. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. And at the same time, it also does come down to, prioritizing what you really care about, right? Like if your goal is to build the biggest company in the world and maximize revenue and maybe impact, and then you're trying to put all of your kind of time into doing that, and you're willing to go and neglect those other aspects of your life, then that's your choice. But for me, I know that my priority is to, have a good career, but also to make sure that I stay healthy and that I can actually enjoy this good career for a while. And then also, spend time with the people that I really love. And so for me, it just comes down to like ruthless time management and prioritization. And that's something that even helps me in the mental fitness side of things, just feeling kind of this sense of control over my calendar.
I love it. Ruthless prioritization. We're going to come back to that in a second when we talk a little bit more about your mental fitness journey. But before we dive in there, I want to know you a little better, Randy. So, where are you from? Uh, how did you become interested in these topics generally? Like, I love, it sounds like you've been kind of thinking about mental fitness for a long time, and you're a marketer. So, also marketing, I'd say, in many ways, could potentially be disruptive to one's mental fitness. So, yeah, talk to me a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I grew up in Westchester, New York, so suburb outside of the city. Have kind of stayed in New York my whole life. So went to Syracuse University, came back to Manhattan. So New York's kind of the epicenter of just my social life. And as far as mental fitness, I think I've always been a pretty ambitious person. I always knew that I wanted to start my own company and do something for myself. So like growing up, I was one of the kids in high school that was selling sneakers on Facebook and Instagram. And like that was my first business. Then that transitioned into other side hustles. Like, and I always had this desire and almost feeling that I wasn't cut out for that traditional, just like go to a good school, get a good job, corporate path. And so that carried a lot of excitement, but that also carried just a lot of stress and uncertainty. And
Okay.
so I didn't feel it as much, I'd say, in the high school and kind of like early formative years, just because still under my parents' roof and there wasn't as much pressure. But definitely towards the tail end of college, where it was time to, figure things out. And I think, senior year specifically, I had a full course load. I was figuring out, what I was going to do after from a job perspective. And I'd also decided to write a book where I explored the relationship between childhood bullying and entrepreneurship. And so both
Wow.
the actual act of going and, layering on that coursework, I was also working like part-time jobs at the time. So the schoolwork, the part-time
Oh,
job, the writing the book, and then still going and doing all of the fun college stuff. You know, I love to party. I wanted to be with my friends. I was traveling, and being able to manage all that required one, put a lot of stress on me, but required me to make sure that my mind was right to be able to go and do all those things and do them at a high level. And so that's what really got me into, you know, my own mental fitness journey, on top of, through the book, being able to speak to a lot of high performers who had struggled with, you know, bullying specifically, but then all the things that come along with that just in your adult years that can impact certain things like stress or burnout, or, you know, overextending yourself to be a people pleaser. Like, there's a lot of things that I would hear from their journey that I would also see in my own, and it just made me more mindful of, you know, how can I try to either avoid those, lean into those things like that.
Wow. Now, there's like 12 directions we could go. I'll pick one for
Sure.
ruthless prioritization purposes. How did you pick the topic of this kind of like theme between bullying and really, I call it mental fitness. In your case, entrepreneurship is one big mental fitness moment. But yeah, would love to hear about those two things and how they came together for you.
Yeah, so that originally came from my own personal experiences growing up. Like I said, I kind of always knew that I wanted to do something a little bit different. And when you were in middle school, different or anything weird is like immediately kind of just makes you a target for just being an outcast or something like that. So I wouldn't say I was like a total, you know, outcast. I still had a lot of friends. I was athletic. I was on the sports teams, but I definitely caught some flack, and it definitely impacted me. And so selling the sneakers and kind of doing all that entrepreneurial stuff that I talked about before was what gave me the confidence to kind of break through that. And so that was a very pivotal
Cool.
moment of my life. And then I was at an entrepreneurship conference. I heard this professor talking, and he was running a like capstone senior year business class. And instead of having all the students create business plans that they would never go on to start, he had them write the first draft manuscript of books that could then go on to be used as, you know, leverage to get jobs or interviews, start your own business, whatever that was. And so that got my wheels turning. And I was very interested in, like, had there been other people, other entrepreneurs who had experienced this, and this was kind of the catalyst for their growth. And so I went to do a bunch of research on it, and nothing was really out there from a literature side of things. So I said, all right, I'm looking for a new project. Why don't I go and, you know, actually go and write this? And so that kicked that off. And yeah, I learned, I could fill up a whole nother, you know, podcast talking about what I learned
Yeah.
and the different correlations and things like that. But there definitely is a correlation, and it's actually in many cases a positive one in terms of giving people a lot of the tools that they need to succeed, both in the entrepreneurial landscape, but also I'd say just in the broader mental fitness landscape. So you think of like resilience, goal attainment, moral development, and empathy, wanting to treat people the way that they're treated, whether that comes into just broader business hiring and firing, having just a humanistic outlook on the way that you deal with people. And a lot of that comes from, you know, their prior experiences. So I thought that that was really interesting.
That's amazing. So people who have been bullied tend to display those characteristics through entrepreneurship.
Exactly.
Wow.
And their broader
Wow.
lives.
Wow. 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 So if someone was listening to this, or someone's parents were listening to this, um, somebody who's getting bullied, although adults can surely get bullied, really quickly, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think the best thing, if you're, you know, the kid in that moment, is to be able to understand that it would pass, and honestly try to seek out some type of content or people who like have gone through it, and just hearing that I think is super helpful. And then honestly tell them that those things that they're generally getting bullied for are what end up becoming their superpowers in the future. And so those are the things that go and they start the business off of, or they become known for, or whatever that is. And so that those kind of two shifts in my mind were really powerful. And then there's one more that we'll probably touch on the mental fitness side of things. But yeah, I'd say those are the big two.
Amazing. I love it. And when it comes to the go hear from other people who've been through it, that falls into what we would call like the science of confidence and how to build it. Confidence being efficacy or belief in your ability to do something. It's when you see other people doing it or going through it and making it through the other side and feeling good about themselves, really powerful. And then obviously, really shifting your perspective by seeing, to your point, these things that you're being made fun of as a superpower. That's huge. Yeah, I
100%.
was
Yeah.
made fun of for being super nerdy growing up. That was like a thing. Like, why are you always studying so hard? Why are you always working so hard? And yeah, I'd say it's like my superpower as an
And look where it
entrepreneur.
got you.
So
Yeah,
no, I know.
exactly.
I mean, here building the world's, mightiest mental fitness organization around. But no, it's very, very true. That resonates a lot with me.
Exactly. And I'd say that. And then even just like opening people's eyes to the fact that post traumatic growth does exist, because you tend to think of these things to be conventionally bad and that they have really negative lasting effects, but that you can actually spin this type of adversity to be something that actually helps you build those skills that go on to be super valuable in the real world, whatever you go and do.
Yeah. Now, for folks who don't know what post-traumatic growth is, can you define it real quick?
Yeah, it's more or less what I just described in the sense of when you're faced with this adversity that conventionally may seem to be very traumatic, and it is traumatic, you can actually, use different mental fitness practices and psychological practices to go and spin that to actually grow from that experience and to actually help it shape in a positive way a lot of the things in your life. So on the bullying side of things, there's studies that show that people who were bullied, 51% of them, and this is a study ages 1865, all different socioeconomic backgrounds, careers, 51% of them said it actually had a positive impact on their lives, which is pretty interesting given, traditionally people would think it to be conventionally bad. And so even hearing that and being like, wow, there's actually people that are growing from that, I think is a really interesting mental unlock.
Absolutely. And important to say that there's also some people who don't. So bullying is still bad, and we should make sure it's
Totally.
not something that happens regularly. But that
100%.
theme around shifting something that's really hard into something good is incredible. And I love that you've written the book, Randy. So I'm excited to check it out. And I'm sure a lot of
Appreciate
my
it.
friends are, and the listeners are too. Um, all right, so let's get into a little bit more about your mental fitness journey. So you had mentioned earlier, we talked about ruthless prioritization. We talked about this idea that you've always kind of been juggling a lot of product projects. Um, can you talk to me about like, was there a moment or something that made you say, wow, uh, I need to kind of work on my mind because I'm doing a lot of things? Did you drop the ball somewhere? Was it the book that really spurred things for you? Like, what was the moment that said you decided like, I need to focus here?
Yeah, I think when I decided I need to focus was in that kind of senior year heading into the real world when I had so much going on. And yeah, some things were getting dropped. Sometimes I was feeling very tired and sluggish. I was getting super stressed and almost like paralyzed. Like I consider myself to be a pretty high agency person, but sometimes the stress was actually kind of suffocating that and I was just not taking action. And so yeah, that kind of opened my eyes to trying to stay on top of this and seeking out different tactics, techniques, things that I can implement in my daily life to help me just operate at the highest level. And then I'd say I don't think it's like you do it once and then you're cured type thing. It's something that you really need to continue to hone. And there's definitely times that I continue to drop the ball or put too much on my plate or half-ass certain things and wake up and say, all right, I need to, go and course correct and figure this out. And that's something that I'm, actively working on. And I think even more recently, just the more times things come up, the more stress that's added on in life, it's important to kind of audit that and switch course when needed.
I love it. Sounds like you're just a freaking human. I can relate to that too. Everyone always says, I'll have a bad day. And they're like, are you practicing mental fitness? I'm like, actually, yeah, and bad days and hard moments and lacks of focus and all this stuff still happens. So it's really awesome, Randy, to hear that you are a real life human. So one of my questions to you is actually like, I'd love to hear about your kind of the things you're doing to practice mental fitness today, but also how has that evolved given that your life has shifted since school?
Yeah, I'd say the two biggest pillars that I do, one is practicing gratitude, and that takes a form of finding perspective in my life. And so I do that in like three different ways, and some of these might be applicable to, younger people who have a bit more freedom. Others are a bit more like if you're like have more of a rigid structure, you can do that as well. But I think the three biggest one that I do every day is visualization, and this one's going to sound kind of morbid, but I actually think
Okay.
of, what are the most important people things in my life, right? So my parents, my girlfriend, my job, whatever that may be. And then I think I really like visualize like what would it be like if that went away tomorrow. So it could be, or what if God forbid my parents pass away or me and my girlfriend break up or, I love being self-employed for having control of my time. What if I needed to go back into the office and really have this like rigid 9 to 5? And I really sit and kind of think about that. And at first I get a bit sad, right? Like it's like, oh my God, this is awful. And then it makes me, once I feel that sadness, it makes me really appreciate those things a lot more. So I'd say that's a
Totally.
big one from the visualization side of things. The second one I do is I love to, get real world perspectives, like see how, I'm very fortunate to have all of the things that we consider pretty essential, but there's so many people who don't have that. And so how can you kind of go and see that other side? So you can either do that
Love it.
by traveling and or just going and like volunteering in somewhere in your area. So I used to work for a company called Bombas that was super mission driven, specifically with the homeless community. And one of the great aspects about them was it was super ingrained in just the employee culture. And so multiple times a week, groups of employees were
Love it.
going out into the field and helping out within the homeless community. And so doing that, a couple of times a month was just a great reminder for me and very grounding and even just eye opening to see. I do a lot of traveling outside of the country as well. That's something that's always really helpful for me in terms of perspective. And then the last one is if you can't go and, do that in person, just watching some of the videos online. So there are two specific kind of areas of the world that I'm fascinated
Nice.
by that like if I ever need to kind of be brought back to reality, I'm stressing out about something that's stupid and trivial, but it's really stressing me out. I go and I watch a video on these places and I'm just like, wow, I am so lucky and grateful to have what I have, and that kind of brings me back.
I think what's really interesting is that a lot of your gratitude practice has to do with like visualizing and really seeing like a world that is not your own and being really grateful for what you do have. And I think a lot of times you hear about people writing down three things they're grateful for, which is super meaningful. But if you are an actively, you know, visual person like I am, seeing those things in your mind or like in front of you in real life or even in a video is really powerful. So I think those are really special examples that I haven't heard.
100%. Hearing the people speak, right? Hearing their whatever, if it's pain in their voice or desperation, it's like there are people literally sacrificing their lives for a chance to have the life that I have, in some of these cases. And so when you hear that,
Totally.
it's pretty sobering pretty quickly of whatever you're kind of like stressing out with at a work side of things. It's just not nearly as relevant.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So gratitude is huge. There's three ways you practice. Talk to me about this ruthless prioritization and also your interest in deliberate use of technology in your everyday.
Yeah. So the ruthless prioritization is the way that I either taught about this or someone sent me a blog post a while. Have you heard of like the rocks, pebbles, sand framework? Yeah. So I feel like it's a pretty,
So, yeah.
yeah, it's pretty I'd say widely known. It's been around for a while. But basically the idea is you have this jar and you want to fill the jar with rocks, pebbles, and sand, and everything needs to fit in the jar. So each one of those three things represents a different aspect of your life. So you have the rocks that are the main pillars of your life, so, friends, family, relationships, religion, work. You have the pebbles, which are important, but not as important as the rocks. So that could be, some really cool hobby that you're working on, or a new project, or some new skill that you're trying to develop. And then you have the sand, which is kind of everything else. So that could be social media, going out, partying, doing whatever that kind of non-core or essential things to your life are. And so if you try to fit the sand first and then put the rocks and the pebbles into the jar overflows. So if you try to put all of the non-important stuff in first and then you try to make time for what matters, it doesn't work. But if you put the rocks in first, the really important things, you put the pebbles in next, and then you layer on the sand, all the sand kind of sifts through to the bottom and it kind of rises up and it fits really nicely in the jar. So that's obviously a metaphor for, ruthless prioritization. And then also really important, and this kind of dovetails into the tech stuff, is also carving out time for solitude. So I think one of the really unfortunate aspects of technology is that we're just constantly stimulated, and we
Totally.
are kind of willingly constantly stimulated. And it's this weird thing where it's like if you were at work and you had, or you work from home and your kid or your brother or your husband's like, hey, you want to do this, you want to look at this, like, and you're like, shut up, I'm working. But then your phone's giving you all these pings or text messages and you're just like, yeah, like I'll scroll. And it's this crazy kind of agreement that we've made just because that's the way the world works now, that we're willing to sacrifice our time to do whatever is needed the second that it comes up. And I think because
Totally.
of that, not only do we lose the time and the productivity aspect, but you also don't get enough time with yourself. So yeah, I'm constantly looking for ways to be very mindful about how much time I'm spending on my phone and if I'm using it as a tool for an intended purpose or if I'm just using it as a distraction device. And so, I can go into plenty of different little tools and tactics and devices and things that I use to manage that on a day-to-day basis. But that's something that has been super impactful in my life. And now that, I'm building a few different little projects around it and having the opportunity to speak with a lot of people and understand how it impacts them too.
That's amazing. And I want to hear about the resources that you use on your own. But first, I'd love to hear like what are you hearing from people? Like what kind of stories? Because I think to your point, like most people will hear social media overuse or phone overuse or yeah, I check my email too much, but like it's not like I'm not addicted or it's not that big of a deal. I'm good with it. How would I remember people's birthdays? That's like one of my favorite thing, it's like
Yeah.
when people talk about getting off of Facebook or something. But there's this like very much this like middle space that's like actively probably unhealthy or not in non-intentional use. But people aren't doing much about it. So yeah, what are you hearing from people on that front?
Yeah, I think it's so subjective, and that's part of the what I like about speaking with different people about it, is because you hear something new every time and it affects everyone differently. And so there's some
Yeah.
buckets of people where they are like they're the talkers and they're the kind of idea people where they're like, I want to go run a marathon or I want to go start a business or I want to learn to DJ. And it's like, okay, well, why don't you? And then it's like, well, I don't have the time. It's like, have you checked your screen time recently? And they're like, oh yeah, I am spending, 4 hours a day scrolling or 3 hours a day scrolling. And they don't even realize how much time it is because it might be, 20 minutes in their commute and then they're on the toilet for 20 minutes and then they're waiting to pick up their kid for soccer and like next thing you know it adds up to this really substantial amount of time. And so I think that that's been something interesting where it's like they deep down know but they don't really realize until they see it in front of them and when they even quantify it in like their screen time calculators that show you're going to be wasting x amount of years of your life if you keep up your current screen time habits. A lot of it is accountability, showing up, putting the right practices in place, and maybe some people not knowing what practices to put in place. So I'm seeing a lot of people who are actually kind of acknowledge that there's a problem and want to make a solution but they don't even know how to start. And because a lot of these apps are super, they're engineered to exploit a lot of these just psychological hardwirings and the fact that it's just become such a important part of routine for a lot of these people, they don't actively go and change it. And then on the flip side, there's plenty of people who I've given some of these tips and tools to where they make a very very simple shift in their life and they say it has outsized impacts on their sleep, on their mental health and things like that. And ultimately, like if you do kind of some variation of the rocks and pebbles framework and you block out your priorities and you have the priorities and the things that you want to get done and you're hitting on all of those and you want to fill your sand time with social media and it doesn't negatively impact you in the sense you're not self-comparing or it's not making you stressed and you truly enjoy just like kind of taking the time. And some people watch reality TV, some people scroll Instagram, whatever it is, and that brings you value. I don't think it's necessarily bad. I think it's when there's other things that you want to do or you're spending a lot of time and it's affecting your self-esteem or you're self-comparing and a lot of these other kind of negative aspects that happen to come from it as well. I think that's where it's an issue.
Absolutely. That's like, it reminds me of Cal Newport when he talks about digital minimalism. It's, he doesn't use the phone much because it doesn't meet his intentions for a beautiful life. Like, and that's really what you're saying is like, what's important to you. And if it's social media, great. As long as it doesn't, negatively impact you, it shouldn't be an issue. I am curious, like, what are some of the tools you use, or what is the tool that person said, they made a small shift and it had an outsized effect on their life?
Yeah, for sure. So for me, like I'm pretty heavily addicted and it's like a weird situation because I'm aware of it and I still can't control it. And so when in the times where I really want to just like go completely dark, which I did like a 6 week period a few months ago, I kind of throw the kitchen sink at it with a bunch of different tools and resources. But I'd say the ones that have been the most impactful for me, there's this physical device called the Brick. I'm not sure if you've heard of
Okay.
it or seen it, but
No, tell me.
there's kind of like two categories of what are called distraction blockers. So you have the distraction blocker apps like Opal and Freedom, which are software that you can download. You can either select, hey, between 9 to 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., block all of these apps on my phone. And so when you try to go into an app, it pops up with something that says, hey, this app is blocked. But you can always like bypass. You can always press like, all right, let me in. And then it's just a little bit of friction. There's also the option where you can just say, I want to only spend 45 minutes on Instagram a day. And so it'll allow you to hit that threshold and then it'll block it. But again, you can kind of bypass it pretty easily. It's some friction, but it's not a lot of friction. The physical distraction blockers like the brick are a physical device that also has a car mobile app. And so there you can select, what apps you want to block. So in my case, I block all social media, and most of the social media I don't even have on my phone, but the ones I do, I block all of those. And then in order to kind of activate the block, you tap your phone to the physical device. And it's a little small 3D printed brick. And now when you try to open it, that app, you try to open Instagram, there's no way to bypass it. The only way that you can bypass it is by retapping your phone to that physical device. So if I brick my phone and then I go to the gym or I go to the office or I go to Chicago and my brick is at home, I physically cannot get into those apps. Like there is an emergency feature, but it's a lot of friction. And that has been huge for me. And so like I just leave my phone still perpetually bricked. So like I cannot access any social media on my phone ever. I use it on the web version, and that's been super helpful for me just because I am like out and about a lot more, so I'm not always on my laptop. Another big one that I layer on, and that one's like $50, and honestly, it's probably like one of the best $50 I've ever spent. I'm not affiliated with them. It just really
a lot
works
of time back
for me. Yeah, exactly. But the other one that is completely free is a Chrome extension called a newsfeed eradicator, and it does exactly what it sounds like. So you download the Chrome extension, you pick which social media platforms or other websites too. It could be like Reddit, like Hacker News, like GitHub, like it's more built for, tech people. And you set a time limit of when you want to block this newsfeed. And what it does is it just takes away the newsfeed, so the infinite scroll portion, and replaces it with a quote. But you can use the rest of the app intentionally. So like if I block Twitter, I can't scroll my newsfeed, but I can search for your profile and see your tweets, or I can answer my DMs, or I can go to my profile and tweet and respond to engage with the people who are engaging with me. And so it removes the most addictive part of all of these social media apps. And so that works for, Twitter on web, that works for Instagram on web, it works for Facebook, LinkedIn, all that stuff. So I keep that on at all times too. So that, because I've had plenty of people tell me like, I went on LinkedIn to go like DM someone for my job. Next thing I know, I'm like 30 minutes deep down a rabbit hole looking what someone from high school did, like, that I haven't spoken to in 4 years, that they got like a new job. And it's like, how did I let that time get away? But if you have the newsfeed eradicator on and I want to go on to message this specific person, you go and do that, you do what you have to do, and you leave. And so those two, from a strictly social media side of things, have been like removed, 80% of my I'd say unwanted social media time. And then this also might be a hot take, but I just go to the gym without my phone. And so I don't go with no phone, no headphones, and like trying to carve out either whether that's an hour going to the gym or just going like a 30-minute walk, or just like have some time a day if you're able to just step away with no phone on you. I don't know, it's really liberating. And especially if you're going for a walk, there's so many times where you're kind of like heads in your phone and you're not paying attention to what's around you, and just like being able to walk around, taking your surroundings, process things, like see something that you might pass, 10 days in a row and you never notice that this changed, or it's really beautiful, or just things like that you never normally get if you're kind of perpetually plugged in or listening to something or stimulated. Doing that at least for 30 minutes every day has been really powerful as well.
I love it. And mine, we call it stop, or stopping everything, to basically practice building rest and awareness in your mind. So love that so much. There's those TikTok videos going around about raw dogging flights where people will just sit without headphones or anything for extended periods of time. And traditionally, if someone did that, they were considered like a total psychopath.
Yeah.
Same thing on the subway in New York City. People always laugh about that. But I think, to your point, it's not just like a nice to have. It's actually an essential if you want to be able to focus, recharge your brain, and feel good every day. So I love all those different ideas about how you do that, especially the gym. I think that is a hot take. That's
yeah.
I
stumbled upon that one almost out of just like accidental or necessity, which way you look at it. Like I, had the AirPods
Yeah.
like everyone else, and I would constantly, wherever I was going, have my AirPods in, listen to a podcast or something, music. And then I lost the AirPods, and I'd like just gotten a new pair, and I didn't want to spend the other like $250 to get it again. So I was like, all right, I guess I'm just gonna like live without AirPods for the next, because I have these like headphones that I'm wearing for my computer. I'm just like not gonna go buy them again, and so started to go to the gym without them, and then it like was like, oh, this is kind of nice, right? Started going on the subway without them, and go pick up my coffee, and you start to talk with the barista a little bit more. Like I think the AirPods, and it's something that I use so much, and they're so convenient and they're great, but at the same time I think they've just taken away so much of that small little interaction at a day-to-day lives that we used to have, even with the phones, just because it's almost like a signal of don't talk to me. And like in New York specifically, like there's already that kind of
Yeah.
like hidden notion, but this is like a clear cut signal that you don't want to be bothered. And when everyone has them in, there's a lot of that little like serendipity or conversations that you miss. And so, yeah, I kind of just stumbled upon that one of, wow, I'm not going to go to the gym anymore with my headphones because I don't have them. And then it turned into, all right, if I don't have my headphones and I'm not listening to music, I'm not going to blast it on my phone. So there's no need to have my phone. And yeah, now I just go to the gym without my phone.
I love it. That's really, really strong. So I'm curious, there's a whole bunch of things you do. You're very clear on your priorities. You've got this kind of radical prioritization exercise. Your time blocking. So you're blocking time off on your calendar for this stuff. You're really thoughtful about how you use your phone. And I'm sure some days are better than others for sure. But,
Definitely.
you're trying to spend time, in silence. Is there anything else big that we're missing in terms of how you think about practicing mental fitness? Obviously, by the way, pursuing your relationships as well and spending time with other people. Is there anything we're missing? And then I have a follow-up question to that.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I think I don't know if physical fitness kind of falls in the mental fitness bucket, but that's just been
Of
one that
course it
I've
does. You got to move your body to move your mind.
exactly. So that's one that
Yeah.
I've really gotten into recently, and like I still kind of hate working out. Like I grew up playing a ton of sports, and I love playing sports and having a game and kind of a purpose around that. But even like the act of just running to run, I could never get into. I always said like if you put a ball in front
Yes.
of me and told me to chase it, like I could do that for miles. But if you say just go for a few mile run, like I just can't get myself to do it. And I kind of felt that way about going to the gym. It was always something like weightlifting specifically, something that I would pick up and I would then stop and I would go for a few months and I never really stuck. And I'd say within the last 2 years, and even especially like the last year, it's become something that's just become a staple of my day, and now I can't imagine my life without it. And I think getting to it's almost like I equivalent to like doing a cold plunge where it's like those the first 30 seconds really suck, and then once you get over that hump it's pretty enjoyable, where it's like those first few months of working out for someone who don't enjoy working out, like you're sore all the time, you don't really know what you're doing, you feel like you're kind of just like lost in the gym, and then once you get over that hump and it becomes a real part of your routine, it's super impactful. And so that's something where I start my day off, or I try to, 5 out of 7 days a week with some sort of workout, and it just sets a good tone for the day. And I heard a good quote, I don't know where it was from, but it's almost like, I've never met a loser that wakes up at 7 a.m. and works out. And I was like,
I love that.
that's
I
pretty
love that.
true.
It's so true. I'm curious. I'm curious for you. What shifted for you? Like you went for years where this wasn't like a sticky thing. Did you find a way to put a ball in front of you at the gym, so you could turn it into a game? Like,
Yeah, it was, and this probably ties actually nicely into mental fitness and this idea of like kind of pushing yourself. But I think I was going, one, I'm just a naturally impatient person, as I think a lot of like young people now are. And so like I wanted to see the results right away, and I wasn't seeing the results as quickly as I wanted. And so that was a little bit like demotivating. But I think a second part was I was just very uneducated about just like kind of even how building muscle works and fitness and these broader topics. And so I was never pushing myself to failure, like going really intense to the gym. So I was kind of just showing up and maintaining. And because I was doing that, I was never seeing the results I wanted. And then it was never really enjoyable. And now it flipped to, because I do have like this competitive nature from just growing up and playing sports, to wanting to push myself the same way that runners try to, get a personal record or run more miles. Like it was like, all right, can I beat my personal record on this? Or can I push myself till a point of, discomfort where I'm kind of strengthening my body, strengthening my mind. And like once I framed it like that, and then obviously because I was pushing myself harder, saw some more results, that made it a lot more addicting. And it kind of like made me excited to go up and push myself.
I love it. And I can relate to that too. I used to be a runner. I wasn't a good runner, but I was good enough, I always like to say. And so I was always kind of working to beat my own time. It's like the personal record. And I've been able to take a lot of that into the gym now as a grown up, even though I'm not exactly an athlete. I always joke I'm a mathlete. So there's that. But so can relate to that. So a couple rapid fire questions for you. You ready?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
This is where we can get some more of those hot takes in here if you have any. So one, uh, what's the best thing you've read on any of these topics that like in the category of mental fitness? Be a book,
Yeah,
be
yeah,
an
yeah.
article.
I think so. Can I give two, or do I got to stick it to one?
You can give one. I mean
All
two.
right.
Sorry.
So I say on the book side of things, I think specifically related to like a lot of the digital minimalism type stuff, the book that a lot of people are talking about, The Anxious Generation, that really shines a light on how impactful excessive social media and tech use is, especially on the younger generation, and then also adults, and then also thinking about how these younger people are going to go and enter the workforce, how my future kids are going to interact with this stuff. That was super interesting. Just like really, if you want a book to wake you up and like, all right, maybe I should be a little more mindful about that. That was definitely one of them. That's top of mind. And then the second one is an article or more of just like a idea is the idea of the spotlight effect. So more, it's basically that, we're all so worried about what people think of us, and we think that people care a lot more about what we do than they actually do, and the reason that they don't care is because they're only focused on themselves. And so the same worries that we have, like, oh my god, there's a stain on my shirt, or what if I did this embarrassing thing, or like even inversely, like I did so well on this test or this performance, like everyone's going to love me now. Like people just don't care. And I think reading about that and fully internalizing it and even speaking to other people about how they kind of deal with that is one of those things that I think once you see it, you can't unsee it. So reading about that has been something that's super impactful.
Love it. Both of those things, and we'll be sure to link them in the comments. So next is best piece of life advice.
Yeah, so I think it's honestly the spotlight effect thing. Like, someone told me just no one cares about you. They said it very bluntly, but they were like, very, very few people really care about what you do, what you're doing, what you're achieving. You can't be doing this for other people or what they think. You really need to do, for yourself. And then another book that I think exemplifies that is called Wanting by Luke Burgess. And so it gets into this idea of mimetic theory and how there's all these different models that we and influencers, but other just influences around us that we kind of ingest subconsciously, and they directly shape the things that we want in life. And so being mindful of that is really interesting too. It's like, why do I want the things that I want? Am I doing something for the external validation? Do I want this so that it's something that I think society tells me to want? And so that kind of idea that a lot of the stuff is people copying other people, and then also tying that into the fact that no one really cares about what you're doing, and you're not focused on you nearly as much as you are, I think is really powerful.
Love it. Okay, if you could give advice to one of the people you love most in your life on their most stressed day.
Yeah, I'd say, and it's so cliche, and sometimes I don't believe it too, that, it'll all work out type cliche, but I think like one person I'm immediately thinking is like my mom is just a chronic overthinker, and I definitely get it from her, but she stresses out about, every little contingency and dots every I and every T, and she'll edit some of my writing, and, she's pointing out commas that aren't even relevant, and it's just like, take a step back, like it'll all work out. A lot of these things aren't nearly as important as you make it seem, and then I think like goes hand in hand with that, specifically in the work environment. Perfection is the enemy of progress. And so like she is the perfect example of just like trying to be a perfectionist. And I'm very much in the camp of, you obviously want your first thing that you put out to be good, but put something out, see what sticks, get the feedback. If you're not embarrassed by what you were doing 6 months ago, then you're not growing. Like that's very much the mindset that I take. And I think that applies to a lot of different areas outside of work, even just personal growth, trying new styles. If you're dressing different, trying a new hairdo, reinventing yourself, like you don't need to have it all figured out. It kind of just carries itself out as it does, but taking action is the first step.
Amazing. And speaking of action, if you were to tell everyone from this podcast to take, like, that's it. Like, what's the one thing that they should start with of all the different topics? And
Yeah, it would just be that you have a lot more agency over your life than you think. And I think a lot of people underestimate just how much control and agency they really have in their lives. And there's an image that I love from Tim Urban, Wait But Why, which is basically, and you can link to it, you've probably seen it, it's pretty widely distributed at this point, but it's basically this like tree of different paths, this vertical tree, and there's a line down the middle, and one side's like black and one side's green, and they have a little dot like you see on a map, and it's like you are here, and it's basically like everything else that's on this green side is completely up to your choice. Like whatever path you want to take is just completely up to you. It's in your hands. And I think a lot of people, forget that. They get bogged down in a bad job or a bad relationship, things like that, and they feel like they don't have control. And yeah, I think the one piece of advice would be that you do have control. You just got to go take the action to do it.
I love it. That's amazing. Well, Randy, thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been such a pleasure exploring your modern mind. I'm curious, and I'm sure everybody else is, where they could find you outside of.
Yeah, so my two probably biggest used social platforms are Twitter and LinkedIn. So you could always shoot me a DM there. I try to post content about a lot of this stuff as much as I can. And then I also write a newsletter specifically about the digital minimalism, digital intentionalism. So that's called The Reboot. Readreboot.com. I'm sure we can link to it. But yeah, if you're looking to spend less time on your phone or just kind of build a healthier relationship with tech, I offer a lot of different tips, kind of like the brick, like the newsfeed eradicator, and just some more mindset stuff every week. So definitely give that a look. And then, yeah, if you ever need help on the content side of things, I do work with a bunch of tech companies helping them on that end too. So feel free to message me about that also.
Amazing. And we know that as a professional, he's a ruthless prioritizer. So it'd be a pleasure to work with you, Randy. I have no doubt across the board. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your time and your mind today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I look forward to checking out some of the things we talked about today, especially the brick. That sounds incredible.
Yeah, it's really cool. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation, and what you're building is amazing too. So hopefully this helps someone, and I've no doubt that your app will too.